Hello everybody, Darrin here. I am the head coach and owner of The Threshold, and I have your February training tip. What better way to start the video series than to actually speak about some key fundamentals that you would want to consider for your training program. There are three, and I take my inspiration from Stephen Seiler of the 80-20 notoriety. A couple of years ago, Stephen came out with his hierarchy of training needs for endurance athletes, very much synonymous with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And he basically said that these elements are very important for an endurance athlete to consider, but the bottom three layers of that pyramid were critical, and that's what I'm going to speak about in this video. Applying those three, have the research, they have the backing, and most likely putting that into your program will make a big difference. The first of those is training frequency and volume of training. Now, oftentimes you'll see that, well, in my experience, I often have athletes come to me where they have a program that they've been following for months, for years, and it's 3 or 4 times a week of cycling, and it's an hour at a time, and they can't understand why they're not making any improvements in their performance. Oftentimes, the first thing that you would want to do then, before you consider intensity, before you consider new shoes, before you consider a new physio, or whatever it is that you're looking at, or a new bicycle, you want to look at total frequency and volume of training. So if you're training 3 times a week or 4 times a week, add another session. If you're already training 6 or 7 times a week, look at trying to add 15 or 20% extra volume in terms of time. And you will see a difference in your performance. You will start to see your performance shift. The layer that then sits on top of total frequency and volume of training is high intensity. Now, many in the endurance realm in the last 10 years, I think we've seen our fair share of HIIT, of Tabata. There's no doubt that high intensity training works. And again, I think a key element here as a coach is that the athlete that comes to me, the athlete that stands in front of me, horses for courses. Not everyone's going to benefit from 40-20. Not everyone's going to benefit from neuromuscular work. Not everyone's going to benefit from VO2 max work, or doing lactate intervals where it's 2 times 20 and all these magical unicorns that promise performance that don't necessarily deliver. But high intensity, without a doubt, on top of training frequency and volume of training, is going to make a big difference. The big mistake that I see is that it's not that athletes don't know how to train hard, it's that they train hard too often. So something to consider. On top of high intensity, Stephen puts training intensity distribution. Now, what does this mean? It basically says, well, if you've got a certain amount of volume, obviously Stephen's of the 80-20 notoriety, he says that 80% of that needs to be done at a fairly easy level. And this is where training intensity distribution comes in. So if you're doing a lot of high intensity training, and I've seen athletes who are doing 4 or 5 hard sessions a week and they can't understand why they're not making any progress. Sitting at 40 or 50% of their total training time at threshold or above, it's a recipe for disaster and it's a recipe for fatigue. So in summary, first layer, total frequency, volume of training. So if you're going to make any changes to your program, that's your first port of call. Second level is high intensity work. If you don't have any high intensity elements in your program, maybe as a runner you need some strides, maybe you're not doing enough. Most of the time people are doing too much, but high intensity is the next layer that goes on top of looking at what is important for your program. And then the last layer on top of that would be your training intensity distribution. So if you have the first 2 layers of volume and intensity, you want to make sure that those two are in a nice percentage to each other. Most of the time with my athletes, 10 to 15% high intensity is enough, especially when you're doing their data metrics and you start to understand what exactly it is that they need. That oftentimes makes a big difference, and it's enough. So that's it. I hope that makes sense. I know it's very difficult to put a lot of information into a 5-minute video, but I hope that if you have any questions, please leave it in the comments below. And if you want any more information, please check out our website. Okay, train hard and prosper.